To determine the effectiveness of various recruiting sources and methods, it's important to evaluate your recruiting efforts. The primary way to discover whether recruiting efforts are financially effective is to conduct formal analysis as part of recruiting evaluation. The emergence of big data and analytics is making the process easier than it was in the past. Various other factors can be measured when evaluating recruiting as well. Organizations evaluate recruiting effectiveness to see how their recruiting efforts compare with their goals and budget, past patterns, and the recruitment performance of other organizations. Measures of recruiting effectiveness can be used to see whether sufficient numbers of targeted population groups are being attracted and to determine the best sources of applicants. Information about job performance, absenteeism, cost of training, and turnover by recruitment source helps adjust future recruiting efforts. Since the goal of a good recruiting program is to generate a large pool of applicants from which to choose, quantity is a natural place to begin evaluation. The basic measure here considers whether the quantity of recruits is sufficient to fill job vacancies. A related question is, does recruiting at its source provide enough qualified applicants with an appropriate mix of diverse individuals? In addition to quantity, a key issue is whether the applicant's qualifications are sufficient to enable the organization to fill the job openings. Do the applicants meet job specifications, and do they perform the jobs well after hire? Measures that can be used include performance appraisal scores, months until promotion, production quality, and sales volume for each hire. There are several ways in which you should measure the effectiveness of your recruiting efforts. Let's take a look. Looking at the length of time it takes to fill openings is a common means of evaluating recruiting efforts. If openings are not filled quickly with qualified candidates, the organization's work and productivity are likely to suffer. If it takes 45 days to fill vacant positions, managers who need employees will be unhappy, and unfilled positions cost money. Further, it may tarnish customer reputations if the company cannot deliver what's promised. Different formulas can be used to evaluate recruiting costs. The calculation most often used to measure such costs divides total recruiting expenses for the year by the number of hires for that year. The problem with this approach is accurately identifying items that should be included in those recruiting expenses. Because recruiting activities are important, the cost and benefit associated should be analyzed. A cost-benefit analysis of recruiting efforts may include both direct costs like advertising, recruiting salaries, travel and agency fees, and indirect costs like the involvement of operating managers, public relations, and so on. Cost-benefit information on each recruiting source can be calculated. One means for evaluating recruiting efforts is yield ratios, which compare the number of applicants at one stage of the recruiting process with the number at the next stage. The result is a tool for approximating the required size of the initial applicant pool. It is useful to visualize yield ratios as a pyramid in which the employer starts with a broad base of applicants and progressively narrows. Another useful calculation is the selection rate, which is the percentage hired from a given group of candidates. It equals the number hired divided by the number of applicants. For example, a rate of 30% indicates 3 out of 10 applicants were hired. The selection rate is also affected by the validity of the selection process. A relatively unsophisticated selection program might pick up 8 out of 10 applicants for the job. 4 of those might turn out to be good employees. A more valid selection process might pick out 5 of 10 applicants, but 4 of the 5 perform well. Selection rate measures not just recruiting, but selection issues as well. So do applicable rate and success base rates. Calculating the acceptance rate helps identify how successful the organization is at hiring candidates. The acceptance rate is the percentage of applicants hired divided by the total number of applicants offered jobs. A longer-term measure of recruiting effectiveness is the applicant's success base rate. The success base rate can be determined by comparing the number of past applicants who have become successful employees against the number of applicants they competed against for their jobs, using historical data within the organization. Recruiting effectiveness can be increased by using evaluation data to target different applicant pools, tap broader labor markets, change recruiting methods, improve internal handling and interviewing of applicants, and train recruiters and managers.